The man who fired first did not always win, but the man who waited for a perfect shot often never got one. That was the brutal logic of an Old West gunfight. Not two men standing 50 paces apart beneath a silent clock. Not hands floating over polished holsters while an entire town watched from behind curtains. Real frontier violence was usually closer, faster, dirtier, and far more confusing. A chair scraped, a warning failed, a hand moved. Then the room exploded. By the time anyone understood who had drawn first, one man might already be on the floor, and 3 witnesses might remember 3 different versions. Speed mattered because most gunfights did not begin as formal contests of accuracy. They began as arguments, arrests, ambushes, robberies, drunken confrontations, family feuds, and sudden decisions made at distances where there was barely time to think. The advantage belonged to the person who recognized the moment first. That does not mean accuracy was unimportant. A miss could waste the only opening a man had. A wild shot could strike an innocent person. A skilled gunfighter needed enough control to make speed useful. But under frontier conditions, accuracy without readiness could become meaningless. The target was moving. The shooter was frightened. Smoke filled the air. People ran through the line of fire. The weapon might be drawn from beneath a coat, lifted from a table, pulled from a saddle, or grabbed after the violence had already begun. There was no range officer, no clean signal, no second attempt. To understand this reality, imagine a saloon in a Kansas cattle town during the 1870s. The room is loud. Cards slap against a table. Whiskey has made one man brave and another careless. A lawman enters because someone at the rear is wanted on a warrant. The wanted man sees the badge. The lawman sees his eyes change. That is the beginning, not the draw, the recognition. Each man now knows what the other may do. The lawman has to decide whether to speak, move closer, call for surrender, or act. The suspect has to decide whether he can escape, bluff, submit, or reach for a weapon. Every fraction of hesitation gives the other man information. The room feels it too. Conversations weaken. A gambler turns his chair. The bartender lowers the bottle. Someone near the door steps aside. This is the moment Hollywood stretches into a minute. History often compressed it into seconds. The famous gunfight near the OK Corral in Tombstone involved multiple armed men at close range and lasted roughly half a minute. It was not one clean duel. It was a burst of movement, commands, smoke, gunfire, wounds, and confusion. People later argued about who had intended to surrender, who fired first, and whether the lawman acted properly. That is what real gunfights leave behind. Not clarity, testimony. And testimony is where speed turns into legend. The revolver itself shaped the encounter. Many iconic frontier handguns were single-action revolvers. Before each shot, the hammer had to be cocked. That mechanical requirement created a rhythm different from the rapid, effortless shooting shown in modern films. The weapon offered multiple chambers. It did not offer unlimited time. Drawing, orienting the gun, cocking it, controlling it, and deciding to fire all had to happen while the other person was doing something unpredictable. A practiced owner could become smooth. A frightened one could become clumsy. Smoothness mattered more than theatrical speed. The fastest movement was useless if the gun snagged, the hand lost control, or the shooter fired without understanding what was in front of him. Frontier reputation therefore grew around men who appeared decisive under pressure, not merely men who could perform tricks. Wild Bill Hickok became one of the era's great examples. His reputation was built partly by newspapers and exaggerated storytelling, but contemporaries also associated him with unusual calm in violent situations. Accounts describing his effectiveness emphasize nerve, deliberation, and the ability to act without freezing. He could be beaten in target shooting. That did not mean the better target shooter wanted to face him in a gunfight. Paper does not threaten you. Paper does not move toward a weapon. Paper does not have friends behind you. The difference between a range and a fight was emotional control. Fear narrowed attention. Hands shook. Breath changed. Men rushed movements they had performed correctly 100 times in practice. Some emptied guns without producing a decisive hit. That is why speed mattered most when joined to composure. Hickok's famous confrontation with Davis Tutt in Springfield, Missouri in 1865 later became one of the events used to build the image of the Western street duel. The two men faced each other in a public square after a dispute involving money, pride, and a watch. Both fired. Tutt missed. Hickok's shot struck him fatally. The episode was unusual enough to become famous. That is important. If formal face-to-face duels had been ordinary, this one would not have carried such power. Most killings did not arrange themselves so neatly. Men were shot from behind. They were attacked while seated. They were ambushed near doors. They were killed during arrests. They were surprised in saloons, alleys, hotel rooms, and streets where no one had agreed to rules. The quick draw, as a fair sporting contest, belongs more to later entertainment than frontier custom. The real advantage was often having a weapon accessible before trouble began. That did not mean every cowboy walked around ready for a duel. Many towns restricted firearms in central districts. Working cowboys used guns as tools for protection and hunting, but did not spend every day testing one another in streets. Firearms were expensive, dangerous, and capable of ending friendships, employment, and freedom in one impulsive moment. The most experienced men often understood the cost. A reckless newcomer might believe speed created authority. A survivor knew that avoiding the gunfight was the greatest advantage of all. But once avoidance failed, everything changed. The distance between men became time. The closer they stood, the less time existed. At a few steps, perfect sight alignment mattered less than bringing the weapon into action before the opponent completed his own movement. At greater distance, speed without control became waste. The relationship shifted from instant reaction toward deliberate shooting. There was no single rule, only a shrinking clock, and every foot between two armed men changed how fast that clock ran. If you are enjoying this deeper look beneath the Western myth, subscribe and stay with us. The next turn enters the Gunsmoke, where even witnesses could no longer trust their own eyes. Black powder gunfire did not create the clean visual world shown on screen. It created noise, smoke, flame, and shock. Inside a room, the blast could be deafening. A first shot changed the senses of everyone present. Ears rang. Horses reacted outside. Lamps shook. People dropped behind tables or rushed toward exits. Then another gun fired. Smoke began to hang between the men. Accuracy became harder with every confused second. This is why the first effective shot carried such power. It could wound, disarm, shock, or force the other person to react instead of act. Even a miss could change movement, but a miss also surrendered time. Speed created the opening. Accuracy decided whether the opening mattered. That is the balance hidden by the title of this story. Speed did not replace accuracy. It came first in the sequence. A man who acted quickly enough gained the opportunity to shoot effectively. A man who aimed beautifully after the danger had already moved gained nothing. But fear often destroyed both. Consider what a witness experienced. He might see one man reach toward a coat. He heard a shot. He ducked. When he looked again, both men were firing. Later, a sheriff or judge asked who started it. The witness wanted to help. His memory wanted order. So the mind built a sequence from fragments. That reconstruction could be wrong. Another witness stood at a different angle and saw a hand hidden by a body. A third had been drinking. A fourth favored one side. A fifth heard what happened from someone else and slowly remembered it as if he had been there. The legal aftermath of a gunfight therefore became another battle. Self-defense depended on who appeared to initiate deadly force. Lawmen had to justify shootings. Survivors needed witnesses. Newspapers wanted a readable story. Friends protected the dead or the living. The fastest man might survive the street and lose in court. Or he might control the story because the only person who could contradict him was dead. That possibility haunted frontier justice. Reputation entered before evidence. If a man was known as violent, witnesses interpreted his movement through that knowledge. If a lawman was respected, his version carried weight. If the dead man had powerful friends, pressure moved in the opposite direction. The gunfight did not end when shooting stopped. It moved into testimony, headlines, warrants, revenge, and memory. Newspapers accelerated the transformation. A complicated dispute became a moral confrontation. A drunken killing became a showdown. A cautious lawman became a fearless gunfighter. A survivor learned that fame could protect him, attract challengers, or both. The word gunfighter itself became more common after the classic frontier period. People living through the violence used other terms: shootist, pistolier, desperado, killer, bad man, lawman. Later culture organized these figures into a recognizable type. Once the type existed, every story began to resemble it. Two men, one street, one faster hand. History was rarely that generous to storytellers. The OK Choral fight involved the Earp brothers, Doc Holliday, and members of the Clanton and McClory group amid political, legal, personal, and economic tensions in Tombstone. The confrontation grew from more than a glance in the street. Weapons regulations, threats, rivalries, law enforcement authority, stage robbery suspicions, and local factions all stood behind it. Yet popular memory reduced the conflict to 30 seconds of gunfire. Why? Because the shooting is easier to dramatize than the network that caused it. Speed simplifies history. It gives one moment responsibility for years of tension. But the men walking toward that confrontation were already inside a story that had been accelerating for months. The first shot only made the acceleration visible, and once several guns opened at close range, marksmanship became only one element in a storm of position, surprise, nerve, movement, and luck. Luck survived more gunfights than legend admits. A bullet struck a watch, buckle, gun, door frame, or thick object. A man stumbled at the right moment. A cartridge failed. A horse moved. Smoke hid someone. A shooter fired too high because fear lifted his hand. Afterward, survival could look like skill. Sometimes it was. Sometimes it was an accident nobody could repeat. This uncertainty helps explain why reputations became so powerful. If a man survived several violent encounters, people assumed he possessed a special ability. That belief changed future encounters before they began. An opponent hesitated. A drunk reconsidered an insult. A suspect surrendered. A town hired him as marshal. Reputation created speed without movement. The famous gunman entered the confrontation already ahead because the other man knew his name. Hickok benefited from that aura. Wyatt Earp acquired it more fully after his frontier years, as books and films reshaped his image. John Wesley Hardin cultivated a reputation for dangerous violence. Bat Masterson became a lawman, gambler, sports writer, and legend whose public image grew through storytelling. But reputation could also become a trap. Every challenger wanted to test it. Every newspaper wanted another story. Every enemy knew surprise was safer than fairness. The faster a man was said to be, the less likely a sensible opponent would face him in the open. That is another reason the cinematic duel makes little historical sense. Why give a famous shooter the exact contest he was expected to win? Ambush was uglier and more logical. Wild Bill Hickok himself died while playing cards in Deadwood, shot from behind by Jack McCall. Whatever speed Hickok possessed could not help when the attack came outside his vision. The killing carries the entire lesson. Speed only matters after recognition. No recognition, no race. This is why alertness may have mattered more than raw quickness. Survivors watched hands, exits, reflections, mood, distance, and changes in voice. They noticed when a room quieted. They understood that the argument about cards was becoming an argument about pride, and that pride was moving toward a weapon. The first victory was identifying the turn, the second was deciding what to do. Sometimes the correct decision was to leave. That is not cowardice. It is the skill Western films rarely celebrate because avoidance produces no climax. Lawmen especially had reason to control escalation. Their job involved arrests, drunken disorder, and armed suspects. Killing every difficult man would destroy legitimacy and invite revenge. A capable officer used presence, allies, timing, disarmament rules, and negotiation when possible. The weapon was the final argument, not the first sentence. Still, some officers and violent men developed habits that reduced hesitation when the final argument arrived. They carried guns where they could reach them. They maintained them. They understood their limitations. They practiced enough that basic handling did not require conscious thought. But practice did not turn them into machines. Adrenaline remained. Fear remained. Moral hesitation remained. The human body did not care about reputation. Hands could shake under a famous name. This is where speed became psychological. The person who accepted what was happening sooner gained an advantage over the person still hoping it was not happening. A violent man might move first because he had already decided to kill before the victim understood the encounter. That was not superior gun skill. It was prior intent. Many murders later described as gunfights were unequal from the beginning. One man expected violence. The other expected conversation. The difference looked like speed. If this story is changing how you see the classic Western showdown, leave a like. It helps our History and Film Project continue producing immersive stories that separate frontier reality from familiar choreography. And tell us in the comments which Old West gunfight film stayed with you most. Was it Tombstone, Unforgiven, High Noon, The Gunfighter, or another Western entirely? Because cinema taught us to watch the hands, history tells us to watch the decision made before the hands ever moved. Hollywood needed the gunfight to be visible. Reality often made it unreadable. Film placed opponents in open streets so audiences could understand distance and intention. Music created anticipation. Close-ups showed eyes, holsters, fingers, sweat, and clocks. Editing stretched a few seconds into a ritual. The ritual gave violence rules. Wait, face the opponent. Draw only when both men are ready. Let speed reveal who deserves to survive. Those rules made the killing feel like judgment. Frontier violence rarely offered such comfort. A man could be morally right and mechanically slow. A criminal could shoot first. A bystander could die. A respected lawman could make a terrible decision. A notorious killer could claim self-defense. There was no universal referee to declare the faster hand righteous. The myth of speed solved that discomfort. It transformed survival into proof of worth. The winner lived because he was calmer, quicker, more masculine, more deserving. But a bullet does not measure character. It measures collision. Real skill existed. Some people were unusually composed, practiced, observant, and capable with firearms. Hickok's reputation cannot be explained only by fiction. Nor can every surviving lawman be reduced to luck, yet skill operated inside circumstances. Where was the weapon? Who expected trouble? How far apart were the men? Was the room crowded? Who had been drinking? Was the first movement clear or misunderstood? Did the cartridge fire? Did fear freeze one man? Did someone intervene? Change one answer? And the famous survivor may become the forgotten dead. That is why speed mattered more than accuracy in many close frontier confrontations. Speed governed access to the moment. It allowed a person to act while action still had value. Accuracy came next. Nerve held them together. Luck stood behind both. The final image is not a noon street. It is a crowded room after midnight. A card game has stopped. One chair lies on its side. Lamp smoke trembles near the ceiling. A bartender watches two men who have moved beyond insult, but have not yet reached gunfire. One man is known to be dangerous. The other does not want to look afraid. Neither is standing correctly for a duel. No one clears the room. No clock marks the hour. A customer near the wall realizes what is coming and begins to move toward the door. That movement distracts everyone for half a second. Then a hand disappears beneath a coat. The other man reacts. A shot crushes the room. Someone screams. The lamp goes out. When light returns, witnesses disagree about everything. One says the dead man drew first. Another says he was reaching for his hat. The bartender saw more but says less. The survivor stands with a smoking revolver, already becoming the author of the event. By morning, the newspaper has a headline. By next year, the story has a cleaner ending. By the time Hollywood finds it, both men stand alone beneath the sun. That is how a gunfight becomes a duel. The confusion disappears. The witnesses disappear. The alcohol, politics, fear, and prior threats disappear. Only speed remains. And speed is easy to remember. It is visible. It is dramatic. It turns survival into one movement and history into 1 second. But inside that second lived everything the legend removed: recognition, intention, distance, fear, mechanical limits, moral hesitation, and chance. The fastest gunfighter was not necessarily the man whose hand moved quickest in a demonstration. It was the man who understood the danger first, remained functional while others panicked, and acted before the opportunity disappeared. Sometimes he aimed well enough. Sometimes he did not. Sometimes the other man never had a fair opportunity. And sometimes the only truly skilled person was the one who recognized the turn, stepped through the door, and lived without firing. That was the logic of Old West gunfights. Accuracy could win a shooting contest. Speed could seize a violent moment. But judgment decided whether that moment needed to exist at all.